Marcus wiped the grease from his calloused hands as he approached the massive derelict ship floating in the salvage yard's zero-gravity bay. The vessel stretched nearly 300 meters, its hull scarred by plasma burns and meteor impacts. Most salvagers avoided ships this old, especially ones from unknown alien civilizations. But Marcus had always been drawn to puzzles that others couldn't solve. The airlock hissed as he cycled through, his portable atmosphere generator humming quietly on his belt. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically throughout the corridors, casting eerie shadows on walls covered in strange flowing script. The ship's architecture was unlike anything in the galactic database, organic curves instead of sharp angles, with passages that seemed to branch like arteries through a massive body. Marcus had been salvaging for 15 years, ever since he'd left Earth's overcrowded cities. He'd learned to read ships like books, understanding their stories through the wear patterns on their hulls and the arrangement of their systems. This vessel whispered of desperation and hasty abandonment. His scanner detected valuable rare metals deeper in the ship's core, but something else caught his attention, a faint energy signature that pulsed with an almost biological rhythm. Following his instincts, Marcus navigated through collapsed bulkheads and debris-filled chambers, his magnetic boots clanking against the deck plates. The energy trail led him to what appeared to be a medical bay, though the equipment was so alien he could only guess at its purpose. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls, some still glowing with residual power. In the center of the room sat a pod-like structure, roughly the size of a human child. Marcus approached carefully, his hand hovering near the plasma cutter on his tool belt. The pod's surface was translucent, revealing something moving weakly inside. As he got closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was alive, definitely alien, but unmistakably young and in distress. The creature inside was roughly humanoid, but with elongated limbs and what looked like vestigial wing structures along its back. Its skin had a pale, almost luminescent quality, and Marcus could see the rapid flutter of what might have been gills along its neck. Most disturbingly, the lower half of its body appeared motionless, while its arms moved in what seemed like desperate silent cries for help. Marcus's ethical subroutines kicked in immediately. He'd encountered abandoned crew members before, though never alien ones. The salvage code was clear. Life always took priority over profit. But this situation was different. The creature was obviously not adult, and from what he could observe, it appeared to be paralyzed or severely injured. He began examining the pod's controls, trying to understand the alien interface. The symbols seemed to shift and flow like living things, responding to his touch in ways that human technology never did. After several minutes of careful experimentation, he managed to establish a basic communication protocol with the ship's dying computer systems. The information that downloaded into his portable translator made his heart race. The creature was indeed a juvenile, abandoned here when the ship's crew had evacuated during some kind of emergency. The medical pod had been keeping it alive for months, possibly years, but its power was failing. Without intervention, the young alien would die within hours. Marcus stared at the creature through the pod's transparent surface. Its large, dark eyes seemed to track his movements with an intelligence that was both alien and heartbreakingly familiar. This wasn't just some animal. This was a sentient being, a child who had been left behind in humanity's equivalent of a hospital bed. The practical part of his mind calculated the complications. Taking an unknown alien aboard his ship could expose him to diseases, parasites, or worse. The creature might be dangerous despite its apparent helplessness. And then there were the legal implications. First contact protocols, xenobiology quarantine procedures, and a dozen other bureaucratic nightmares. But as Marcus watched the young alien's weak movements, none of that mattered. He'd been that abandoned child once, left in Earth's undercity when his parents couldn't afford to feed another mouth. Someone had taken him in then, given him a chance at life. Now it was his turn to pay that kindness forward, even across species lines. Working quickly, Marcus began the delicate process of transferring the alien to his ship's medical bay. He'd retrofitted the space with equipment salvaged from a dozen different species, creating a versatile treatment facility that could handle most biological emergencies. The challenge would be adapting his human-oriented systems to sustain alien physiology. As he carefully extracted the pod from its housing, the young creature's eyes met his through the transparent barrier. There was no fear there, only a desperate hope that Marcus recognized from his own childhood. In that moment, species differences ceased to matter. This was simply one being helping another survive. The transfer took 3 hours, with Marcus constantly monitoring both the alien's vital signs and his ship's atmospheric systems. His medical AI worked overtime, analyzing the creature's biology and suggesting compatible treatments. The paralysis appeared to be the result of spinal trauma, possibly sustained during whatever disaster had forced the evacuation of the derelict ship. Once the alien was safely installed in his medical bay, Marcus finally allowed himself to consider what he'd gotten himself into. He was now responsible for a paralyzed alien child of unknown species, with no idea how to contact its people, or even if they still existed. His simple salvage run had just become the most important mission of his life. 3 days passed before the alien child showed signs of truly waking up. Marcus had been sleeping in shifts, constantly monitoring the medical bay's readings while trying to decode more of the derelict ship's databanks. His coffee supply was running dangerously low, but he couldn't risk leaving for supplies while his patient remained critical. When the alien's eyes finally opened and tracked his movement across the room, Marcus felt a surge of relief mixed with apprehension. Those eyes were remarkably expressive, shifting from confusion to wariness to something that might have been cautious hope. The creature's mouth moved silently, and Marcus realized it was trying to speak. His translation software had been working overtime, cross-referencing the alien script from the derelict ship with known linguistic patterns. After several attempts, he managed to establish basic communication through a combination of visual symbols and tonal patterns. The process was frustratingly slow, but gradually a picture began to emerge. The alien's name was something that translated roughly to Zara, though Marcus suspected the actual pronunciation was far more complex than his human vocal cords could manage. She was indeed young by her species' standards, approximately equivalent to a human teenager. Her people were called the Veltar, an ancient spacefaring civilization that Marcus had never encountered in any galactic database. Through painstaking communication, Zara explained that her ship had been part of a research fleet studying dangerous quantum anomalies at the galaxy's edge. When one of the anomalies had destabilized catastrophically, her vessel had been caught in the resulting space-time distortion. The evacuation had been chaotic, and in the rush to abandon ship, she had been left behind in the medical bay where she was recovering from a training accident that had damaged her spinal column. Marcus learned that the Veltar possessed technology far advanced beyond anything humanity had developed. Their ships were grown rather than built, incorporating living biomechanical systems that could adapt and self-repair. The medical pod that had kept Zara alive was actually a sophisticated organism designed to sustain patients indefinitely, but it required specific nutrients that had been exhausted over the months of her isolation. What troubled Marcus most was Zara's matter-of-fact acceptance of her abandonment. In Veltar society, she explained, those who could not contribute were often left behind during emergencies. Her paralysis made her a burden that the fleeing research team couldn't afford to carry. This casual dismissal of what humans would consider a profound betrayal shocked Marcus to his core. As the days passed, Marcus threw himself into understanding Veltar physiology and technology. His mechanical expertise, honed by years of working with alien salvage, proved surprisingly applicable to biomechanical systems. The Veltar had solved the boundary between living tissue and manufactured components in ways that human science was only beginning to explore. Zara watched his efforts with growing amazement. In her culture, beings from other species were generally considered primitive, useful only as laborers or research subjects. But Marcus's intuitive understanding of complex systems and his refusal to give up on problems that seemed impossible impressed her despite her cultural conditioning. The breakthrough came when Marcus realized that Zara's paralysis wasn't permanent damage but rather a protective shutdown triggered by trauma. Her nervous system had essentially turned off major functions to prevent further injury, but it needed specific bioelectrical stimulation to restart. The medical pod had been maintaining her life, but lacked the programming to initiate recovery protocols. Working 18-hour days, Marcus jury-rigged a treatment system using components from his ship's engineering bay, combined with salvaged Veltar technology. His approach was decidedly unorthodox, human mechanical thinking applied to alien biological problems. Where Veltar medicine was elegant and precisely calibrated, Marcus's solution was robust and adaptable, designed to work even if individual components failed. The first-time sensation returned to Zara's legs. She stared at Marcus with an expression he couldn't interpret. In halting, translated phrases, she told him that her own people had declared her condition irreversible. Their advanced medical technology had failed where human ingenuity and stubbornness had succeeded. But the real revelation came when Marcus began teaching Zara about human culture and history. She was fascinated by humanity's tendency to rescue the wounded rather than abandon them, by their willingness to expend enormous resources to save even a single individual. This concept was so foreign to Veltar, thinking that she initially assumed Marcus was lying or exaggerating. As her mobility slowly returned through Marcus's improvised therapy, Zara began to understand that she had encountered something unprecedented, a species that valued life and potential over immediate utility. Marcus's casual assumption that her life had inherent worth, regardless of her physical limitations, challenged everything she had been taught about the nature of civilization and progress. Marcus, meanwhile, was learning that his simple act of compassion had implications far beyond saving one alien child. The Veltar were not just another spacefaring species. They were one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, with technology and knowledge that could revolutionize human society. But they were also a people who had lost something fundamental in their pursuit of perfection and efficiency. Through their growing friendship, both Marcus and Zara began to see their respective species in new ways. Marcus realized that humanity's perceived weaknesses, their emotional responses, their refusal to abandon the vulnerable, their tendency to improvise rather than follow established protocols, might actually be strengths that more advanced civilizations had forgotten. And Zara discovered that advancement and wisdom were not necessarily the same thing, that her people's cold efficiency had cost them something precious that this crude but caring human had somehow preserved. 2 weeks after Zara had regained feeling in her legs, an unexpected visitor arrived at Marcus's salvage station. The sleek Veltar scout ship materialized out of quantum fold space with barely a ripple, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with patterns that Zara immediately recognized as military identification codes. Her expression shifted from curiosity to something approaching terror. Marcus watched through his viewports as the alien vessel positioned itself alongside his much smaller salvage ship. The Veltar craft was beautiful in an unsettling way, its surface seeming to breathe and flow like living skin. Weapon ports opened and closed in rhythmic patterns, and Marcus realized he was looking at a creature as much as a machine. The communication request came in perfect unaccented English, which surprised Marcus until he remembered that the Veltar had been monitoring human transmissions for decades. The voice was cold, precise, and utterly without emotion. "Human vessel, you are harboring stolen Veltar property. Surrender the genetic material immediately and your ship will be allowed to depart intact." Marcus looked at Zara, who had gone pale, her newly mobile legs trembling with more than physical weakness. She began signing frantically in her species' silent language, trying to communicate something urgent. His translation software was still learning the gesture-based components of Veltar communication, but he caught fragments. Not property, exile, and something that roughly translated to worse than death. Activating his comm system, Marcus responded with deliberate calm. "This is Captain Marcus Chen of the salvage vessel Persistence. I'm not harboring any property. I have a passenger who requested assistance after being abandoned on a derelict ship." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. When the Veltar voice returned, it carried a note of what might have been surprise. "The specimen claims to have requested assistance. This is irregular. Nevertheless, genetic material damaged by inferior medical intervention cannot be returned to the gene pool. Prepare for sterilization protocols." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach as weapon systems on the alien ship began to glow with increasing intensity. But before he could respond, Zara pushed herself unsteadily to her feet and activated the communication panel herself. What followed was a rapid exchange in the musical Veltar language, with Zara's voice growing stronger and more defiant with each phrase. The weapon's glow faded slightly, and Marcus caught fragments of what Zara was saying through his translator. Something about human ingenuity, restoration protocols, and genetic viability. Beyond standard parameters, the Conversation continued for several minutes before the Veltar ship's commander switched back to English. The specimen claims that human intervention has restored functionality beyond original genetic specifications. This is improbable. You will permit boarding for verification. Marcus looked at Zara, who nodded grimly. She had been dreading this moment, she explained through their communication system. In Veltar society, those who survived catastrophic injuries were often viewed as genetically compromised. Her paralysis had marked her for culling, a process disguised as medical treatment but designed to prevent inferior genes from polluting the population. But Marcus's unconventional treatment had done more than simply restore her mobility. The human approach of strengthening existing systems rather than replacing them had actually enhanced her physical capabilities. Her nervous system, forced to create new pathways around the original damage, had developed redundancies and efficiencies that exceeded normal Veltar parameters. The boarding party consisted of 3 Veltar military specialists, their movements fluid and precise in ways that made Marcus feel clumsy by comparison. They were tall, elegant beings with the same general body structure as Zara, but carrying themselves with cold authority. Their leader, who identified herself as Inquisitor Velsarith, examined Zara with instruments that resembled living creatures more than medical devices. The examination lasted over an hour, with Zara subjected to tests that pushed her newly restored capabilities to their limits. Marcus watched anxiously as she demonstrated reflexes, coordination, and problem-solving abilities that clearly surprised the Veltar observers. When the testing concluded, Inquisitor Velsarith studied the readings with an expression that Marcus couldn't interpret. The genetic material shows not only restoration, but enhancement, she announced finally. This is unprecedented. Human medical techniques appear to have triggered adaptive responses we did not know existed in our genome. What happened next challenged everything Marcus thought he knew about advanced alien civilizations. Instead of simply taking Zara and leaving, the Inquisitor began questioning Marcus intensively about his treatment methods. She wanted to understand every detail of his improvised medical procedures, his mechanical approach to biological problems, and his philosophical justification for intervening in the first place. Marcus found himself explaining human concepts of medical ethics, the value of individual life, and the principle that intelligence and worth weren't diminished by physical limitations. The Veltar listened with expressions that ranged from confusion to fascination, occasionally conferring among themselves in rapid, musical phrases. The breakthrough came when Marcus demonstrated some of his hybrid biomechanical systems, the fusion of Veltar technology with human engineering principles that had made Zara's treatment possible. The elegant alien systems had been designed for optimal performance under perfect conditions, but Marcus's modifications made them adaptable and resilient under adverse circumstances. Inquisitor Velsarith examined one of Marcus's improvised medical interfaces, her long fingers tracing the crude but effective connections between human components and Veltar biotechnology. "Your species approaches problems from directions we have never considered," she said slowly. "This methodology suggests potential applications beyond medical treatment." As the conversation continued, Marcus began to realize that he had stumbled into something far larger than a simple rescue. The Veltar were facing challenges that their advanced technology couldn't solve. Genetic stagnation from their perfect but inflexible medical systems, technological dead ends caused by their pursuit of theoretical ideals over practical solutions, and social problems arising from their dismissal of imperfect individuals who might have contributed different perspectives. Humanity's apparent weaknesses, their tolerance for imperfection, their willingness to work with flawed systems, their emotional investment in preserving life, regardless of immediate utility, represented solutions to problems the Veltar hadn't even recognized they had. But the real surprise came when Inquisitor Velsarith made an unprecedented offer. Instead of taking Zara away, she requested permission to study Marcus's methods further. The Veltar Council wanted to understand how human primitive techniques had achieved results that their advanced civilization couldn't match. Marcus looked at Zara, who was staring at the Inquisitor with an expression of complete shock. In all of Veltar history, she later explained, no inferior species had ever been asked to teach them anything. The very concept violated their understanding of how the universe was supposed to work. The Veltar research station materialized around Marcus's ship like a living cathedral, its biomechanical walls flowing and reshaping themselves to accommodate the human vessel. Marcus had agreed to the unprecedented collaboration, partly from curiosity but mostly because Zara had quietly informed him that refusing would likely result in both their deaths and the destruction of Earth's entire solar system. The scale of what he'd stumbled into became clear when Inquisitor Velsareth introduced him to the research team. The Veltar had assembled some of their most brilliant minds, scientists who had lived for centuries, accumulated knowledge that spanned multiple galactic epochs, and guided their civilization's development for millennia. And they were all there to learn from a human salvage worker who had barely finished his basic education. Marcus felt overwhelmed as he toured laboratories that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, witnessed experiments that manipulated matter at the quantum level, and tried to comprehend technologies that treated space and time as malleable resources. But gradually he began to notice the limitations hidden within all this magnificence. The Veltar approach to problem-solving was breathtakingly sophisticated but utterly inflexible. Every solution was calculated to 17 decimal places, optimized for perfect conditions, and implemented with flawless precision. When those perfect conditions didn't exist, which was most of the time in the real universe, their systems failed catastrophically rather than adapting. Marcus's crude repairs to Zara had worked precisely because they were imperfect. His jury-rigged solutions could compensate for unexpected variables, degrade gracefully when components failed, and adapt to changing conditions. Where Veltar medicine was a precision instrument, Marcus's approach was a Swiss Army knife, less elegant but far more versatile. The first breakthrough came when Marcus was asked to examine a Veltar patient suffering from a rare genetic disorder. Their medical AI had calculated the perfect treatment protocol, but the patient's unique physiology meant that perfection was literally impossible. The Veltar doctors were paralyzed by their inability to achieve optimal results. While the patient slowly died from their inaction, Marcus looked at the problem with human eyes trained by years of making broken salvage work again. Instead of pursuing the impossible perfect solution, he designed a treatment that was good enough, effective, adaptable, and capable of evolving as the patient's condition changed. The Veltar watched in fascination as his deliberately imperfect system not only saved the patient but actually improved their condition beyond what the optimal treatment could have achieved. Word of the success spread through the research station like wildfire. Within days, Marcus found himself consulting on problems that the Veltar had been struggling with for decades. Stellar engineering projects that had stalled because the calculations couldn't account for solar wind variations. Terraforming efforts that had failed because the ecosystems were too complex for perfect modeling. Diplomatic situations that had collapsed because the Veltar couldn't comprehend why other species made irrational decisions. In each case, Marcus's human perspective provided solutions that the Veltar had never considered. His willingness to accept uncertainty, work with incomplete information, and prioritize practical results over theoretical perfection opened entirely new approaches to ancient problems. But the real breakthrough came when Marcus began working with Zara on a joint project. Her Veltar knowledge combined with his human intuition created something neither species could have achieved alone. They developed hybrid technologies that were both sophisticated and adaptable, systems that could operate at the edge of theoretical possibility while remaining robust enough for real-world conditions. Their collaboration produced medical devices that could adapt to treat any species they encountered, engineering solutions that worked equally well in Earth's chaotic environment, and the Veltar's controlled laboratories, and communication protocols that could bridge the gap between radically different ways of thinking. The Veltar research team watched these developments with a mixture of excitement and existential crisis. For millennia, they had believed that their civilization represented the pinnacle of possible achievement. The discovery that crude human methods could improve upon their perfected systems challenged the fundamental assumptions their entire society was built upon. Marcus found himself at the center of increasingly intense philosophical debates. Veltar scholars who had devoted centuries to perfecting their theoretical frameworks were forced to confront the possibility that perfection itself might be a limitation rather than a goal. Their pursuit of ideal solutions had blinded them to the value of adaptable ones. The debates became heated when some Veltar suggested that their entire civilization needed to be restructured to incorporate human-style flexibility. Conservative factions argued that such changes would destroy everything they had built, while progressives pushed for immediate implementation of hybrid systems across their society. Marcus watched these arguments with growing unease. He had simply been trying to save one paralyzed alien child, but his actions had somehow triggered a civilization-wide identity crisis. The responsibility was crushing, especially when he realized that the outcome would affect not just the Veltar but potentially the entire galaxy. The situation reached a crisis point when news arrived that other Veltar factions had declared the research station heretical. A battle fleet was approaching, intent on destroying both the station and everyone aboard it, to prevent the contamination of pure Veltar knowledge with human primitiveness. As alarms sounded throughout the station, Marcus realized that his simple act of compassion had escalated into something approaching a galactic civil war. The Veltar were literally tearing themselves apart over the question of whether humanity had something to offer their advanced civilization. Zara found him in his quarters, staring out at the approaching warships through the living walls of the station. Her recovery was now complete, her mobility fully restored and enhanced beyond original specifications. She moved with fluid grace that combined Veltar elegance with something uniquely her own, a hybrid of two different approaches to existence. "This is my fault," Marcus said quietly. "I just wanted to help you. I never intended to destabilize your entire civilization." Zara's expression was thoughtful as she settled beside him. "Perhaps," she said in her carefully learned English, "destabilization was exactly what we needed. A perfect system cannot grow, cannot adapt, cannot survive change. You did not break us, Marcus. You showed us that we were already broken." Outside, the first energy weapons began to discharge as the approaching fleet engaged the station's defenses. The battle for the future of Veltar civilization, and possibly the galaxy itself, was about to begin. The battle for the research station should have been a massacre. The conservative Veltar fleet consisted of 47 vessels, each one a masterpiece of biomechanical engineering capable of reshaping matter at the molecular level. Against them, the research station had only 12 defensive ships and a handful of scientists who had never seen combat. Marcus watched from the station's command center as the first wave of attackers approached, their hulls rippling with weapons that could unravel the quantum foundations of reality itself. The station's defenders moved to intercept, but their ships were research vessels hastily equipped with improvised weapon systems. It looked like a completely hopeless fight. Then the human factor kicked in. The research team had spent weeks studying Marcus's hybrid technologies, learning to think in terms of adaptable imperfection rather than optimal precision. When the battle began, they applied these principles to their defense systems with results that surprised everyone, including themselves. Instead of trying to match the attackers' perfect weapon systems, the defenders used deliberately crude human-inspired modifications, missile guidance systems that could recalculate their targets mid-flight when the original approach proved impossible, shield generators that sacrifice maximum efficiency for the ability to adapt to unexpected attack patterns, weapon arrays that prioritized rapid deployment over theoretical damage output. The conservative fleet's perfect tactical algorithms, designed to counter known Veltar defensive strategies, found themselves facing something entirely outside their parameters. Ships that should have been destroyed in the opening moments of combat instead adapted their systems in real time, compensating for damage and exploiting opportunities that the attackers' rigid protocols couldn't anticipate. Marcus found himself drafted as an unofficial tactical advisor, his human perspective helping the station's defenders think outside the constraints of traditional Veltar warfare, where their ancient military doctrines called for precise formations and calculated responses. Marcus suggested chaotic, improvised tactics that confused enemy targeting systems and created opportunities from apparent disasters. The turning point came when one of the station's research ships, badly damaged and apparently helpless, used Marcus's suggestion to deliberately crash into an enemy vessel's quantum field generator. Instead of attempting a perfect intercept that would have been impossible with their damaged systems, they aimed for a good enough collision that disrupted the attacker's exotic matter containment. The resulting explosion propagated through the enemy fleet's carefully coordinated formation, cascading failures as perfect systems proved unable to cope with imperfect conditions. Ships that could have survived direct assault were crippled by the unexpected chaos of their neighbors' malfunctions. But the real shock came when ships from other Veltar factions began arriving in the combat zone. Word of the battle had spread throughout their civilization, sparking debates and conflicts that had been brewing beneath the surface for centuries. The conservative faction's attempt to destroy the research station had triggered something approaching a galactic civil war. As Marcus watched more and more ships arrive, taking sides in a conflict he had never intended to start, he realized that his rescue of Zara had been merely the catalyst for changes that were already inevitable. The Veltar civilization had reached a point where its pursuit of perfection was becoming a dead end, and contact with humanity had simply forced them to confront that reality. The battle evolved into something more complex than simple combat, as diplomatic channels opened between various factions. Progressive Veltar who wanted to explore hybrid technologies, moderates who sought gradual change rather than revolution, traditionalists who weren't necessarily opposed to new ideas but feared losing their cultural identity, and hardline conservatives who would rather see their civilization destroyed than contaminated by alien influence. Marcus found himself unexpectedly thrust into the role of mediator, his human perspective helping different Veltar factions understand each other's positions. Where their logical minds saw irreconcilable contradictions, his emotional intelligence recognized the fears and hopes underlying the conflicts. The breakthrough came when Zara proposed a demonstration that would settle the debate once and for all. Using the hybrid technologies she and Marcus had developed, she volunteered to attempt something that pure Veltar science had always considered impossible: the restoration of consciousness to victims of quantum neural collapse, a condition that had been universally fatal for millions of years. The research station happened to have several patients in quantum stasis, victims of various disasters who had been preserved in the hope that future technology might save them. Veltar medical science had tried for millennia to develop treatments for their condition but had always failed, because the damage was too complex for perfect repair. Marcus's approach was characteristically different. Instead of trying to perfectly restore the damaged neural pathways, he designed a system that could work around the damage, creating new connections that were functionally equivalent, even if they weren't structurally identical. His hybrid biomechanical interfaces could adapt to each patient's unique condition, compensating for irreparable damage while enhancing surviving systems. The first patient awakened after 3 hours of treatment, their consciousness fully intact, despite neural architecture that would have been considered hopelessly compromised by traditional Veltar standards. As news of the success spread through the assembled fleets, even the most conservative factions began to reconsider their positions. But Marcus's greatest achievement wasn't the medical breakthrough, it was the way he handled the political fallout. Instead of trying to force the Veltar to abandon their cultural identity, he helped them understand that adaptation and tradition could coexist. Human-style flexibility didn't have to replace Veltar precision. The two approaches could complement each other, creating systems that were both sophisticated and resilient. The final resolution came when the eldest member of the Veltar High Council arrived personally to assess the situation. Ancient beyond human comprehension, she had guided her species through previous evolutionary crises and possessed wisdom that transcended factional politics. After examining Marcus's work and speaking privately with Zara, the elder made a pronouncement that would reshape the galaxy. The Veltar would establish a new branch of their civilization, dedicated to exploring hybrid technologies and collaborative research with other species. Rather than seeing human methods as a threat to their perfection, they would embrace them as tools for continued growth and adaptation. The conservative fleet withdrew without further combat, their objections overruled by an authority even they couldn't challenge. As the various factions departed to spread word of the new era throughout Veltar space, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this point. He had started as a simple salvager trying to save one abandoned child. Now he was apparently the architect of the first major change in Veltar civilization in thousands of years. The responsibility was overwhelming. But as he watched Zara coordinating with her people to establish the new research protocols, he felt a deep satisfaction. Sometimes the most profound changes began with the simplest acts of compassion. 6 months after the Battle of the Research Station, Marcus found himself aboard a vessel unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The ship was a true collaboration between human and Veltar engineering, its hull flowing with biomechanical systems that could adapt to any environment while maintaining the rugged durability that human design philosophy demanded. The mission was ambitious, beyond anything either species had attempted alone. Reports had been coming in from the galaxy's outer rim of a phenomenon that was destroying entire star systems, not through conventional warfare or natural disasters, but by somehow draining the quantum coherence that held matter together at the subatomic level. Veltar perfect condition models couldn't account for the anomaly, while human chaos management theories lacked the computational power to address something operating on such a vast scale. Together, however, the hybrid approach offered hope. Marcus's team combined Veltar scientists who could calculate the precise mathematics of quantum field interactions with human engineers who specialized in making systems work under impossible conditions. The result was a research vessel that could survive in environments that would destroy conventional ships while gathering data that neither species could collect alone. Zara had become something unprecedented in Veltar society. Bridge between worlds who could think in both elegant theoretical frameworks and practical improvisation. Her recovery from paralysis had become a symbol of the new collaborative era, proof that apparent weaknesses could be transformed into unexpected strengths. She served as the mission's coordinator, translating between human intuition and Veltar logic in ways that made their cooperation possible. The first signs of the anomaly appeared 3 days out from the affected systems. Space itself seemed wrong, not visibly different but registering on instruments as somehow less substantial than normal reality. Stars in the distance flickered with inconsistent luminosity, and the ship's quantum sensors detected patterns that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Marcus watched his Veltar colleagues struggle with readings that their perfect instruments couldn't properly interpret. The anomaly existed in a state between normal space and complete dissolution, following rules that their theoretical models had no framework to contain. Their centuries of accumulated knowledge became a liability when faced with something that shouldn't be able to exist. But Marcus's human-trained instincts, honed by years of working with broken salvage and impossible repairs, recognized familiar patterns in the chaos. The anomaly wasn't destroying matter through some exotic new force. It was essentially a breakdown in the universe's maintenance systems, reality experiencing the equivalent of mechanical failure on a cosmic scale. Working with Zara, Marcus began developing a diagnostic approach that treated the affected space like a malfunctioning machine, rather than a theoretical physics problem. They mapped the anomaly's progression, identified the components that were failing, and began to understand the cascade of breakdowns that was spreading. Destruction across multiple star systems. The discovery that changed everything came when they realized the anomaly wasn't natural, it was the result of an ancient Veltar experiment gone wrong. Millions of years ago, during their species' early expansion period, Veltar scientists had attempted to create a perfect quantum stabilization field that would make entire solar systems immune to stellar variability and cosmic disasters. The project had been abandoned when early tests produced unpredictable results, but the experimental apparatus had never been properly decommissioned. Over geological timescales, the forgotten machinery had continued operating, slowly accumulating quantum instabilities that had finally reached critical mass. The Veltar's pursuit of perfection had created a flaw that threatened to unravel reality itself. Traditional Veltar problem-solving approaches were useless against their own perfect system run amok. The stabilization field was operating exactly as designed, but under conditions its creators had never anticipated. Shutting it down required accepting that the solution would be imperfect, partial, and potentially dangerous, concepts that violated every principle of Veltar engineering. Marcus proposed a characteristically human solution. Instead of trying to perfectly counter the stabilization field, they would deliberately introduce controlled instabilities that would force the system to adapt. His plan called for creating quantum errors that would cascade through the field's perfect calculations, ultimately causing it to recognize that its original parameters were no longer valid and shut itself down. The Veltar scientists were horrified by the proposal. Deliberately introducing chaos into a quantum system was like performing surgery with explosives. Theoretically possible, but practically suicidal. But as they studied Marcus's projections and compared them to their own failed attempts at perfect solutions, they began to see the twisted logic behind his approach. The mission to implement Marcus's plan required entering the heart of the anomaly itself, navigating through space where the normal rules of physics flickered in and out of existence. The hybrid ship performed magnificently, its adaptive systems compensating for conditions that would have destroyed any conventional vessel. As they approached the ancient Veltar installation, Marcus marveled at the artifact his alien friends had created. It was beautiful in the way that only perfect technology could be, its crystalline structures extending across multiple dimensions while managing quantum fields with precision that bordered on artistry. It was also completely insane, operating according to parameters that had been obsolete for millions of years while consuming the energy of dying stars to maintain its impossible perfection. The actual shutdown process was both anticlimactic and terrifying. Marcus's quantum chaos generators were crude devices that looked like they had been cobbled together in a junkyard, which, in a sense, they had been. But when activated, they introduced exactly the right kind of disorder into the stabilization field's calculations. For several agonizing minutes, the ancient system tried to compensate for the new variables, its perfect algorithms struggling to maintain coherence in the face of deliberately introduced randomness. Space around them convulsed as reality itself became uncertain, probability waves collapsing and reforming in patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Then, with a sensation like the universe sighing in relief, the stabilization field finally accepted that its original mission was impossible under current conditions and began an orderly shutdown sequence. The quantum anomaly that had threatened multiple star systems dissolved harmlessly, leaving behind only normal space and a valuable lesson about the dangers of pursuing perfection without considering consequences. As they returned to Veltar space with news of their success, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since his chance encounter with an abandoned alien child. The collaboration between humans and Veltar was producing discoveries and achievements that neither species could have managed alone, opening possibilities for exploration and growth that had never existed before. But the most important change was philosophical. The Veltar were learning that imperfection wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but a feature that made adaptation and survival possible. And humanity was discovering that their perceived weaknesses, their tolerance for uncertainty, their willingness to accept good enough solutions, their refusal to abandon the damaged and imperfect, were actually strengths that could help guide more advanced civilizations away from their own potential pitfalls. 5 years had passed since Marcus first discovered Zara in that derelict ship, and the galaxy had become a very different place. The Human Veltar Collaborative Institute had grown from a single research station into a network of facilities spanning dozens of star systems, each one dedicated to exploring the revolutionary potential of hybrid technologies and cross-species cooperation. Marcus stood on the observation deck of New Harmony, the Institute's flagship station, watching ships from 37 different species dock at the facility's adaptive ports. The station itself was a marvel of hybrid engineering, Veltar biomechanical systems providing elegant efficiency while human-inspired redundancies ensured it could operate under any conditions the universe might throw at it. What amazed him most wasn't the technology, though. It was the people. Humans worked alongside Veltar researchers as equals, their different approaches to problem-solving creating solutions neither species could have imagined alone. Other civilizations had begun sending their own representatives, eager to learn from the partnership that had already solved problems that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. Zara approached from across the observation lounge, moving with the fluid grace that combined her species' natural elegance with the enhanced mobility Marcus's treatment had given her. She now served as the Institute's Director of Cross-Species Relations, a position that hadn't existed before her unique perspective made it necessary. "The Council of Worlds has reached a decision," she announced, settling beside him at the viewport. "They're formally requesting our assistance with the Nexus crisis." Marcus whistled softly. The Nexus crisis was the galaxy's most pressing unsolved problem, a region of space where multiple civilizations had tried and failed to establish stable hyperspace routes, resulting in a transportation bottleneck that was strangling interstellar commerce. Dozens of species had thrown their best technology at the problem over the past century, all achieving only partial and temporary solutions. What makes them think we can succeed where everyone else has failed? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Because everyone else has been trying to create perfect solutions? Zara replied with a slight smile. Perfect hyperspace corridors that won't be affected by the quantum instabilities in that region. Perfect navigation systems that can calculate exact routes through dimensional chaos. Perfect is the enemy of functional, as you taught us. The mission to address the Nexus crisis became the Institute's most ambitious project yet. Instead of trying to eliminate the quantum instabilities that made the region hazardous, Marcus's team proposed working with them. They developed navigation systems that could adapt to changing conditions in real time, hyperspace generators that could maintain stable corridors even when local spacetime was fluctuating unpredictably, and safety protocols that prioritized keeping travelers alive over maintaining perfect scheduling. The breakthrough came when they realized that the quantum instabilities weren't random, they were the result of multiple civilizations' failed attempts to impose order on a naturally chaotic system. Each perfect solution had created new problems, and the accumulated interference patterns had made the region increasingly unstable over time. Marcus's solution was characteristically unconventional. Instead of adding another layer of perfect technology, they would remove the existing systems and let the region return to its natural state. Then, working with the inherent chaos rather than against it, they could establish transportation routes that were resilient rather than rigid. The process took 3 years and required convincing dozens of species to abandon infrastructure they had invested centuries in developing. But when the new system came online, the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The Nexus region became the galaxy's most efficient transportation hub, with routes that could adapt to changing conditions and maintain operation even during cosmic storms that would shut down traditional hyperspace corridors. But Marcus's greatest achievement wasn't technological, it was cultural. The success of human-Veltar cooperation had inspired other species to reconsider their own assumptions about advancement and superiority. The galaxy was becoming a more collaborative place, with civilizations sharing knowledge and perspectives instead of hoarding them as competitive advantages. The ceremony marking the completion of the Nexus project was held aboard New Harmony, with representatives from every major galactic civilization in attendance. Marcus found himself uncomfortable with the attention, still thinking of himself as a simple mechanic who had stumbled into events far beyond his understanding. The Veltar elder, who had first approved the collaborative research, spoke for the assembled crowd. What we celebrate today is not merely a technological achievement, but a fundamental shift in how intelligence approaches the universe. We have learned that perfection is not the highest goal, adaptation is. We have discovered that wisdom lies not in eliminating uncertainty, but in learning to thrive within it. As the ceremony continued, Marcus slipped away to a quieter part of the station. He found himself in the medical bay where he had first treated Zara, now expanded into a state-of-the-art facility that could handle the physiology of any known species. The original treatment alcove had been preserved as a memorial to the chance encounter that had started everything. Zara found him there, as he had somehow known she would. They stood together in comfortable silence, remembering those desperate first days when her survival had been uncertain, and the implications of their meeting unimaginable. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found that derelict ship?" she asked eventually. Marcus considered the question seriously. The ship would have drifted until its power died completely. You would have died alone in the dark. The Veltar would have continued pursuing perfection until it became a dead end. Humanity would have remained isolated on the galaxy's periphery, never realizing we had something unique to contribute. And the Nexus crisis would still be strangling galactic commerce, probably getting worse as more species tried to fix it with perfect solutions that only added to the problem. Marcus shook his head. It's strange to think how many lives have been changed by one moment of deciding to investigate an energy reading instead of just cataloging it for later. Zara's expression grew thoughtful. Perhaps it wasn't chance. Perhaps the universe has its own way of bringing together what needs to be connected. Your species' compassion and ours knowledge, your adaptability and our precision, chaos and order finding balance. Through the viewport, They could see ships from across the galaxy using the new Nexus routes, their various designs creating a flowing river of diversity against the starfield. Each vessel represented a different approach to spaceflight, a unique solution to the challenge of traveling between worlds, yet all of them working together in the hybrid transportation network that Marcus's team had created. "What's next?" Zara asked. Marcus smiled, thinking of the reports coming in from the galaxy's outer rim. Strange signals that didn't match any known technology. Worlds where the normal rules of physics seemed to operate differently. Mysteries that would require new kinds of thinking to unravel. "There's a whole universe out there full of problems that can't be solved with perfect solutions," he said. "I think we're going to be busy for a very long time." As they watched the traffic flowing through the Nexus routes, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He had rescued one abandoned alien child and somehow helped reshape the galaxy's understanding of intelligence, cooperation, and the value of imperfection. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor about the consequences of simple compassion. But perhaps Zara was right. Perhaps it hadn't been chance at all. Perhaps the universe did have ways of connecting what needed to be connected, bringing together different kinds of wisdom when the time was right for change. And perhaps humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their logic, but their stubborn refusal to give up on anyone or anything that still had potential for growth. The future stretched ahead of them, vast and uncertain and full of possibilities that neither species could explore alone. But together, with their hybrid approach that embraced both perfection and chaos, order and adaptability, they were ready for whatever challenges the universe might offer.